Welcome. This is a very special SDP Connect because we're talking about the self-determination program and in the context of an amazing law that just is going to be going into effect on January 1st. So before we get started, I would like to turn it over real quick to Gilda for a quick announcement.
Oh, sorry, Judy. Can you let people know about interpretation first?
Oh, yep. Sorry, everybody. Be sure to pick your language, including if you're an English speaker, because there might be some people who are speaking in Spanish. In fact, I know for sure one of our speakers will be speaking in Spanish. So every English speaker is going to need to choose English as well. And let's get started. You have a choice also of Korean as well.
Hello,
Go ahead.
everyone. Thank you, Judy. I wanted to make an announcement that we're gonna be having a holiday toy giveaway for regional center clients and their siblings. And it's going to be December 20th. That's a Saturday, and it's going to start at 11 a.m. It's first come, first served while supplies last, but we have plenty of toys, and we're going to also have food for families. And so I hope you can make it down. It's going to be in La Puente, and I'll put the address in the chat. It's going to be at the Bodega Ranch Market parking lot. It's 17305 Valley Boulevard in La Puente, California, 91744. And we're still working on the flyer because we're waiting for another partner's logo, but we'll be sending that out in our emails and social media. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you. Thank you, Judy.
Absolutely. Thank you. We love giving away these presents. I dress, and if you need an additional incentive to come, I dress up as Mrs. Claus. So some of you may actually want to see me in that getup. All right, and my husband dresses as an elf, which is it has his particular taste. So we're gonna get started. If you could just share your screen. So we have both English slides and Spanish slides. So let's start with the Spanish slides. And then we will share the English screen, the English slides, and you'll be able to pick which slides you want by going up to the top of your screen and choosing either Espanol screen or English slide screen. Okay. So today we are going to be talking about a law that is being implemented on January 1st, where California's regional centers are now subject to the Public Records Act. We have some amazing speakers today. We can go to the next slide. So I would now like to introduce the author of the bill that put regional centers under the Public Records Act, Assemblymember Dawn Addis. She is the author of the Disability Equity and Accountability Act. And is such a champion for our community. She comes from our community as a former special ed teacher and understands what families go through when they interact with regional centers and how transparency needs to happen. So I am so thrilled that you're joining us just to tell us a little bit about why you decided to author this bill, Assemblymember Addis.
Well, thank you so much, Judy. And I want to say thank you to everyone at Disability Voices United for organizing and hosting me, but also to the hundreds and hundreds of people who came to the Capitol and testified on AB 1147. It was really one of the highlights of my time in the legislature so far was to see the number of people that came out to support this bill. So I represent the Assembly District 30, which is the Central Coast, Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Luis Obispo counties. I have the 8th largest geographic district in the legislature, and we have close to 500,000 constituents, like every other state assembly member. And before I had the honor of serving in the California legislature, I was a special education teacher, and I worked with students at the K-6 level first, in the resource program. Then I moved up to high school and continuation high school. And then I taught a special day class, and I had both mild, moderate, and moderate severe students. And that's where my work with the regional centers truly began. So it's been a career for me of serving people with disabilities, serving families of children with disabilities. And when I had the opportunity to work in this realm, I leaned in immediately because I know that every family needs a circle of support. Every family with a person with a disability needs transparency, they need timely services, and they need a team-oriented focus from those services. And so when we started working on 1147, that was our goal. I knew there was this immense gap in what people needed and what they were receiving, and knew that in the fourth largest economy in the world, we should be doing better. It's just unacceptable. And we've seen that from the reports from the Little Hoover Commission, from Disability United, Voices United, yourselves, from the state audit, that there's just been these huge gaps in essential care. So we brought the bill forward and really had a lot of work to do. We'd heard about the reports of racism and inequitable treatment, long wait times, response delays, limited communication, sometimes no communication. And so we set out to address all of that, to be very aggressive, to make changes to all of the 21 regional centers. 2 years later, lots of negotiation, collaboration, tremendous amount of work over those 2 years. What we brought forward and had signed by the governor is critically important first step to the pathway of getting to where we want to be. So where we started is adding the very important Public Records Act requirement, which will bring transparency to how decisions are made, transparency in communications, and really help families better get the services they need by having a window into what's really happening. And the second part of this is prohibiting employees from accepting gifts over $15 a year from service providers or consumer families. And that's really to promote fairness, and it's something that's standard in government agencies. So trying to bring the regional centers in line with the standards of all government agencies. So we're really excited that this work is going to start on January 1, 2026, that these changes will start. And we're also ready, as we need to be, to take the next steps to continue down the path of improving the regional centers and services for people and their families.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member. And I know that we can count on you as the implementation begins, that if there are any hiccups or some issues that come in, we'll be in touch with you. But everybody, if you could give a virtual round of applause to Assemblymember Addis for all your support and everything. We appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
So now we're going to actually explain to you what is the Public Records Act and how is it going to work for the regional center system. So at this time, I'd like to introduce two of our guest speakers who are going to help me explain this. The first one is Allison Morantz. Allison is, first and foremost, I must say, a parent of a person in the self-determination program, a young adult. Allison is also a law professor at Stanford University and the director and founder of the Stanford Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Law and Policy Project. And we appreciate you being here. We can go to the next slide, actually. The second speaker that we're going to have is Elizabeth Barrios Gomez. Elizabeth is the director of the Integrated Community Collaborative, who was a co-sponsor of AB 1147, and is going to talk a little bit about why this issue is so important to the Latino community and to families generally. So first, I'm going to explain to all of you, and we'll let you know because this seems to come up a lot in the chat. Yes, we are sharing these slides. We will put them repeatedly in the chat by our amazing staff. Thank you to Kaylee. And so first of all, I'll just tell you a little history of the California Public Records Act. It is it was enacted originally in 1968 during a time when good government sort of laws were being enacted. It requires governmental records to be accessible to the public when requested, unless they are exempted and unless it's not allowed. And we're going to go over in detail what those exemptions look like. But I'm going to give you a clue right at the beginning that people's individual information in your IPP, individual information, your health records, your personal records, your Social Security number, all of that is private. So I'm just going to say that from the outset. I'm sure that question will get asked repeatedly as we move on, but no personal information can be provided through the Public Records Act. Records must be identifiable, they must be disclosable records, meaning they cannot be private. And you're going to hear more details here, but regional centers, they have to respond within a certain amount of days. We'll go into detail about that. And that sometimes the information you requested is not going to be for free. You might be charged some amount of money, hopefully nothing too big, to be able to provide you with that information. And you should also know that agencies aren't required to come up with new data. It has to be data or information that already exists. So we can go to the next slide. All right. So why is this a law? So this, I feel like, yeah, no, this is my slide too. So this law, no, is this your slide, Allison, or my slide? I think this is my slide. Okay, I think this is my slide. So the way this came into existence is because the ICC, the Integrated Community Collaborative, and Disability Voices United co-sponsored a law back in 2023 that ended up getting passed in 2024 called AB 1147 or Assembly Bill 1147. And when we first authored the law, it was a very big, I sponsored the bill, sorry. It was a very big bill. It had a lot of important provisions in there to improve services, to improve equity, to improve accountability. But over time, there was a lot of opposition to certain provisions. And in order to save the bill, we had to pare it down to just a few things. And the big thing that was left in the bill was requiring regional centers to be subject to the Public Records Act. We feel this is important because you may not know, but the regional center system is an almost $20 billion annual system serving 500,000 Californians with developmental disabilities and the millions of their family members. So we believe that this was important enough so that we need to have our eye on the data and the policies that are being made at the regional center level. Okay, next slide, please. So a lot of people asked, like, regional centers are private, independent nonprofits. Why? They're not the government. The Public Records Act was put into effect because we want government to be public and transparent, not private nonprofits. So first of all, you should know that there are other private nonprofits who are subject to the California Public Records Act. And the biggest one is California's charter schools. So wherever you live around the state of California, I'm sure there are charter schools in your area. And these charter schools are not part of the school system. They're not actually part of the school district, but they are partners of the school district, and they provide education as an alternative to their local public school. So charter schools are often equated with regional centers because 100% of charter schools' monies to provide education come from taxpayer dollars, federal and state taxpayer dollars. The regional centers, they're the same. 100% of the dollars that are received at a regional center are taxpayer dollars. So they are really doing the government's job by distributing funding from the taxpayers. DDS has an obligation to provide services to Californians with developmental disabilities. You should know in the original law, it wasn't that regional centers have the obligation. It is actually the state of California's Department of Developmental Services. And there was a law passed many years ago for DDS to give money and to create these regional centers for the regional centers to actually arrange for these services on DDS's behalf. The regional centers, though, are even more obligated than charter schools. And this was an important fact noted when the bill was being considered by the Judiciary Committee. And what they saw was that in the charter school example, somebody could say a charter school is an option. So you can either go to your local public school or you can choose a charter school. But if you don't like the charter school, you can always go back to your public school. That is not the case with regional centers. If you want to get services as a person with a developmental disability, you have one option and one option only, and that is to get those services funded through the regional center. You can't say, I'd like an alternative. So because of that, regional centers are even more doing the business of government. They are what I call quasi-governmental agencies. And then finally, I want to give a quote from the Judiciary Committee's analysis of our bill, which says a private entity cannot avoid the legal obligations of the state when it is conducting state business at the discretion of and funded by the state. So even though regional centers are private nonprofits, they still cannot avoid the legal obligations that state agencies have around transparency and following state law. So that's giving you a little bit of the grounding of why regional centers should be subject to the PRA. I'm now going to actually turn to Elizabeth Gomez of the Integrated Community Collaborative. And for her, everybody should know she's going to be speaking in Spanish. So all of you English speakers, you should be going down to the bottom of your screen and choosing English as your language so you can hear the actual interpretation at the same time. Because I am not going to ask Elizabeth to repeat what she said in English. So she just feels more comfortable speaking in Spanish as I feel comfortable speaking English. So go ahead, Elizabeth.
Buenas tardes. Primero que nada, quiero saludar a todos, darle las gracias a Judy Mark, a Disability Voices United y claro, a nuestra querida senadora Dawn Addis y a todos los que están aquí presentes. Judy, antes de comenzar, veo la mano de Fernando. Sé que quiere decir algo porque tenía que hablar esta tarde con nosotros y está por subirse al avión. ¿Le permiten un minuto?
Absolutely. Fernando, are you a co-host here? I'm going to ask you to go ahead, Fernando.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. And I'll be really brief. Unfortunately, I'm at the airport on the way to Sacramento. You'll see you in an hour or so, Judy. But I want, as Assembly Member Addis stated, and we truly appreciate her championing AB 1147 and all the hard work that went into it. But I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge a couple of people. First of all, you, Judy, in leading the charge in the legislative team under DZU, amazing champions. The fact that we're all going to benefit from the PRA is a direct result of the hard work, the tenacity, and just the smarts that went into, this AB 1147 and now having the ability to all of us benefit from the PRA Act. So I know Elizabeth's going to share on our behalf from ICC, but I just want to say thank you. And thank you to the legislative team for an amazing job.
Thank you, Fernando. We love partnering with the ICC. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Ok, muchas gracias. Gracias. Quiero decir que para nosotros, este día, estoy aquí en el Canal en español porque este día es muy importante para nuestra comunidad. Establecer la ley de récord público, para nuestra comunidad significa transparencia sobre los servicios y sobre cómo se están tomando las direcciones en los centros regionales que nos han afectado por años. Sabemos también que para nosotros es muy importante asegurarnos que la discriminación que muchas veces hemos sentido como comunidad ahora pueda tener una explicación. Nosotros con esta habilidad de poder acceder a estos récords, vamos a poder en muchas maneras poder hacer las cosas que antes no podíamos hacer. Y brevemente les diré, para nosotros más transparencia, más responsabilidad, como dije, la discriminación y mejorar los servicios con más igualdad. Yuri, yo sé que más adelante vamos a expandir en esto, pero en pocas palabras, para nosotros este día es muy importante y damos las gracias porque significa esto y mucho más.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elizabeth. All right, so we can go to the next slide, please. Oh, this is just my little thing. It's like much of regional center decision making about the services that people can get is driven by practices and procedures that are hidden from public view. And so this is our effort to unhide them. And now we can move to the next slide, and I'm going to hand it over to Allison. Oh no, sorry. I keep thinking I need to be following on a different screen. I actually have said this, so we can go to the next slide. I said this without the slide being up. Okay, why don't you get started, Allison?
Yeah, so this is just kind of the nuts and bolts, but I really want to emphasize that I wouldn't get too scared by the complexity of the request. It's actually not that complicated. I mean, the basic idea is to figure out what information you want and then kind of, ask for it in a reasonable way. So it's not like you have to fill out like a whole bunch of forms or like it takes a ton of time. It's actually relatively straightforward. So I just want to kind of say that at the outset. So as this slide says, you don't have to say why you're asking for the information. I mean, I've done these requests, not of regional centers yet, of course, but of DDS, for example, and you can just say, this is the information we want. It's not their business why you want the information. So that's kind of one thing to keep in mind. And it's your right. It's your right to ask for information that you reasonably think could be subject to, to this law. I guess I will say maybe now, it is important not to just use it just because you can, just because it does take time and they do have a legal obligation to respond. So you definitely should only ask for things that you really have a reason for wanting. Not because you can't, but just because, it is time that could otherwise be spent on other things. But as long as you have a good reason to ask for it, again, don't have to say why you're asking for it or justify it. You can just ask. Next slide, I guess. Okay. Also, anyone, anyone can make a request. So anyone on this call, you don't have to be living in a certain area or, within the district or anything like that. You can just be a person that's just asking. So it's meant, to be public accountability, public transparency to the public, which is pretty much everybody. Next slide, please. So one of the hardest things about the Public Records Act is actually understanding what public records are. And that gets a little bit tricky. I mean, so Judy said before, they don't have to create public records because you want them to. It's things that already exist. And every once in a while, I have submitted Public Records Act requests in which they get back to me and say that doesn't exist. Sometimes it isn't there, but at least it isn't there. And there's a lot of things that they do have to produce that, and this is a list of some of the things that it concludes. So it's pretty much things that are in writing, things that are written down in any form, memos or emails or presentations, agendas, proposals, contracts, and then it can be data, which is kept in various different systems. It could be financial data. Now, Judy mentioned it, and I'm going to say it again. It can't be data that's protected, that's sensitive data that's about individuals, right? It can't be that. So they might have to give you a version in which they've removed enough information from the document or from the data so you can't identify the individuals. But that still includes a lot of things. You know, like I've gotten files, I usually ask for them like in an Excel spreadsheet, for example. And it'll have a lot of information in it. Of course, it won't have the detailed information about the person involved, but it could have a lot of other information that can be really helpful in like understanding what's going on. Audio recordings. So it's quite broad. It includes a lot of things that already exist. As I said, not things they're creating, things that already exist. Next slide, please. Oh, okay. Or do we skip one? We might have skipped one, but maybe it's not that important. Okay. Okay. So, just to reinforce what Judy and I both said before, there's a lot of people that use this law a lot, you know, across the state. So there's pretty good guidelines for which things count and which don't, although, you know, there's maybe situations in which you have to really push it, you know, so, you know, it's not always crystal clear, but it is a law that's used a lot. As we said before, sensitive information has to be redacted. That doesn't mean they don't have to supply it at all. It just means they have to make sure you can't identify the individual. And in general, public records is pretty broadly defined. In general, they need a pretty good reason to say they're not going to produce it, is kind of the point. And that takes us to the next slide of the exceptions. Okay, these are the exceptions or exemptions. So some of the most common exemptions are really specific personnel records, because remember, that's really getting into individual detail. So if you said, you know, I want to know, you know, I want the HR file, you know, of my caseworker, for example, that probably, I mean, that might fall under that exemption, right? Because that's an HR record specific to an individual. Medical records, of course, you would probably guess that's exempt. If it's related to litigation, that's privileged. That's a context where you don't have to produce that. That's not public information. And then there's other kinds of privilege, attorney-client privilege. So for example, the regional center has hires a law firm to help it with some kind of litigation. Then most of the things that, like emails, for example, between the regional center and their attorney are privileged. That's true in any litigation, actually. So this is no exception. You probably can't get that either. The work that the attorney produces for a regional center is also privileged. Again, that's true in any litigation. That's not unique to the Public Records Act. Some of this just tracks just general types of exemptions or privilege. And deliberative process privilege, that's kind of like, it's kind of details around how they make decisions, but that can get a little complicated. I mean, it'll be interesting to see as this unfolds, what types of privilege different regional centers are claiming. So because some of these it's not entirely clear how they're going to be used, and they're used in different contexts. So deliberative process privilege is a little bit more unusual, but kind of more eternal process of how they make decisions, which could be something that they claim. We'll see. Preliminary drafts and notes. There again, it's like if they're kind of not ready for the public, you know, and they're just the early drafts, that again are some of the exemptions. This is not a full list of every exemption, but you may find that if you file a request and they say, no, we're not producing this, they might list one of these things and say that's why they're not producing it, because they do need to give you a reason if they're not going to produce it. And these are to give you an idea of what those might be. Next slide, please. Okay. Yeah, and then there's this other one. There's this other exemption, which is really general and says, on the facts of the particular case, the public interest served by not making the record public clearly outweighs the public interest served by disclosure of the record. That's one of those catch-all provisions where it doesn't fit into a great category, but there's a situation where maybe something really bad would happen if they disclose this information, or that's what they're claiming. To say, if we disclose this information, then it's going to, I don't know what kind of story they could tell. It's going to sabotage, delicate negotiations we're having with, I don't even know. I don't even know. I'm making up something, and I don't know if this will even come up, but it's possible that they would say, we're not going to produce that information for this reason, but then they probably, I don't know, have to give you more of a reason. Like, what do you mean? Then that's something that if it comes to that, you could try to challenge. But there is that general exemption, for sort of the case we can't think of. It doesn't fall neatly in any specific category under the law. Next slide, please. Okay. So some of this Judy already covered, but in theory, and this law was written a long time ago. I really want to emphasize that, because back when this law was passed, people would actually literally go to the office. They would go to, maybe they would drive up to Sacramento, and there'd be big filing cabinets or something, and they'd have maybe they'd have a desk with a file folder, and they've had redacted documents so they could sit there and look at them or something. As we know, that's not very common anymore. It's not that practical anymore. So even though in theory, you could request to inspect records, I think that's pretty unlikely. Some years ago, I actually filed a request of DDS, and DDS doesn't really want you to show up and be in their office looking at things. And I really suspect regional centers won't want that either. So I would be surprised if regional centers say, sure, come on in and we'll give you a desk, an office to look at these documents. It's possible, but I personally don't think that's very likely. It's more of an old economy thing. Nowadays, in practice, at least in my personal experience, they're more likely to give you copies of it. And just because it's easier for them, they're more likely to give you electronic copies. So all of the things I've requested, either I got a PDF of the actual document, or I got an Excel spreadsheet that had data on it. Now, I'm not saying they can't tell you to come in and look at it. They could. I don't know why they would. It doesn't really make sense to me. So again, it will be interesting to see if any of the regional centers decide to use that option. I think it's more likely that they will send electronic copies. However, the other part of the law that Judy mentioned is, in theory, they can charge you for different things, not just photocopying costs, but if it's data, they can also charge you for the time spent putting the data together. Now, the data has to already exist. Again, they're not going to create the data for you, but let's say it's in their database and it takes them 3 hours to have someone query the database to create an Excel spreadsheet with that data. They could charge you for that time. I've been charged for that time. Stanford has been charged for that time by DDS. And it is in the law that they're allowed to do that. Honestly, it's a little bit hard to know how much time it's really taking them. So I was charged amount of money by DDS. I was a little bit skeptical that it really took them that much time and really cost them that much money. It's a little hard to really honestly hold them accountable for that. And there again, if it becomes a big issue and they're saying, sure, we'll do that for $5,000, then that might become an issue. But I'm hoping it isn't an issue. And it's on them to come back and say, yes, we can produce the records, but it's going to cost us, it's going to cost you this much money because it's going to take us this much time. I would suggest in general requesting electronic copies. There's no reason to request a hard copy, photocopies, right? I think that just takes more time and is more expensive. I would, unless there's some reason not to, and I can't imagine that, just request electronic copies of whatever you're asking for. So that would be like a PDF if it's a particular document, or it would be like an Excel spreadsheet if they're putting data into the spreadsheet. That's the way I've done it in the past, and it worked pretty well. But again, I just want to emphasize they're not just charging you for the photocopying time for the old, putting the paper, to put it through the photocopy machine. That's how it used to work. But nowadays it's more the time spent. They can charge you for the time spent by their staff to just extract the data, put it in an email, you know, document, and send it to you. Next slide, please. Okay. So a lot of agencies now, maybe all of them, but certainly most of them, in my experience, have like a portal, like a dedicated process for submitting a Public Records Act request. And you go on to that portal. Sometimes you can do it informally. I've sometimes done it where you just like send them an email and someone's like, okay, fine. But sometimes we're like, go on to our portal, fill out the document. It's not that big a deal to fill it out. Again, there's not a lot of red tape involved. It doesn't take that long, but they're supposed to have a portal and a form on their website that you can fill out and submit your request. So you can do the whole thing electronically. You don't have to deal with somebody, you know, live. But in addition, there's these other ways of doing it, right? You can do it in person, you can do it by phone, you can do it in email or in a Zoom meeting. I've done it different ways, usually in writing. It's usually a good idea to do it in writing. I would just suggest this because you want the clock to start ticking right away. Like if you mention on a Zoom meeting, they may say, I didn't know you wanted a Public Records Act request. You're like, yeah, of course I did. I asked you. They're like, I don't remember that. And then it's kind of harder to come back and say to them, wait, you owe us a response. They're like, we didn't know, you know, so it's kind of better to get it in writing. I would strongly recommend that. It could be an email, but it's not that hard. I'd probably just go onto the portal and submit the form just so that you have the paper trail. You can document it. You can say, look, here's the date. I requested it on this date and you haven't responded yet. You're not complying with the Public Records Act. So it's, if possible, it's better to do it, you know, in writing, but also you have to be really specific about what you're requesting, right? So you should put in the subject line, if you do it really in email or almost what you do, whatever you do, make very clear in the subject line that it's, you know, public record request, as it says here, just so it doesn't get like buried in a bunch of emails. So it's clear what you're asking for. They can pick it out of the email and respond to it, hopefully quickly. And be very specific about what it is you want. You have to be really specific. Like, I'll try to give you an example. So when I would file some of these requests, again, I've only done it of DDS, I would say, you know, we would like a spreadsheet listing, you know, the number of complaints filed broken down by regional center for the following 10 years. By year. You know what I mean? Like very specific. So like a number. And sometimes I would even describe the table that I want. You know, like they wouldn't always do it the way I wanted, but I would say like a table, like each row is going to be a regional center. The first column will list, you know, the number of people that filed a 4731 complaint. The next column, you know, just kind of being very specific and concrete. Because if you're really vague in the way that you list it, they may come back and say, we don't really understand what you're asking for, you know, and then it slows everything down. So the more concrete you can be, the more they can at least come back and give you a concrete answer about whether or not they have records that they can produce in response. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. So the thing I will say about the Public Records Act, they have to respond really quickly. Within 10 calendar days of receipt of the request, they have to either provide the information or tell you that they need more time or say it doesn't exist. They have to give you an answer within 10 days, 10 calendar days. That is really soon. That is really soon. And that's why it's very important to get it in writing. Because if you mention it in person or on a Zoom or something, they can say, we didn't know you wanted a Public Records Act request. It's better to just put it in writing, because then you can say, okay, I sent it to you. I sent it to you on, you know, December 1st. Today's December 10th. I haven't gotten a response. I'm just reminding you under the Public Records Act, you have to respond and tell me, you know, you could just say what they have to do. And yes, I mean, in my experience in real life, they often don't respond in 10 days. I do just want to say that. Like DDS hardly ever responds in 10 days. It's one of those laws that like, it's often not followed to the letter. So I would not be shocked if you don't actually get a response in 10 days. You should get a response pretty close to 10 days. I mean, what I do is if I don't get a response, then I follow up and say, I'm following up because 10 days have elapsed and I haven't gotten an answer yet. And then maybe a couple days, they'll be like, oh, we're on vacation or somebody's out sick. You know, they'll give you an excuse and then they'll eventually come back and give you an answer. So I just want to kind of set those expectations that you have to be persistent. You have to be persistent. So if you expect it to work perfectly, you will probably be disappointed. But if you recognize that, you know, they may not perfectly comply, but if you keep coming back at them and saying, this is my second follow-up, 20 days have now passed since I submitted my Public Records Act response. I need a response right away. I have, you have to kind of pester them sometimes. I'm assuming if they're like DDS, I've had to pester DDS quite a bit to get responses. And they do respond, but it's not always in the time frame that the law says they're supposed to respond. The problem is it's actually pretty hard to enforce. It's like it's not like if they don't respond in 10 days, you can say, I'm taking you to court. It doesn't really work that way. Like eventually, if they don't respond, then you can try to hold them accountable. But that's just, anyway, I'm just being realistic about that. So you have to recognize it's not that surprising if they don't respond in exactly the number of days the law says. They will respond eventually though. I wouldn't, but it might take them longer than that. So anyway, within 10 calendar days, they're supposed to, unless they have a good excuse, they're supposed to respond. Even if they respond and say, look, we can't get back to you today because, the cousin's, sister of the main person that works on this is out of town or on sick leave or parental leave, whatever, then you at least say, okay, can you give me the date when you're going to respond? You just have to keep coming back and following up. And then, and then they will. And it says again, business hours or holidays, all those things. And they're also, when they do respond, if they don't give you the answer, they usually won't give you the answer, by the way. It's pretty rare that you're going to, in 10 days, get the actual answer. Usually they'll say something like, there's no identifiable records, doesn't exist. Or they'll say, there's a record, but it's privileged, it's exempt, so we don't have to produce it. Or they'll say, we have the record. We're very busy right now with the holidays coming up. We think we can probably get it to you sometime in January. Something like that, and then you can go back and say, well, that's great, but I really need it by January 15th because, there's a meeting that we're blah, blah, blah. I really need it by January 15th. Can you please do your best to get it by January 15th? You're dealing with a human on the other end. And the more if it is urgent, you should convey to them that it's urgent because then they're more likely to sort of expedite it. But, I've waited. If it's a more complicated request, I've waited for several months, honestly. But these are more complicated things from DDS. They did eventually produce it, though. I've never had DDS not eventually produce what we wanted. But, if it's more complicated stuff, it could take a couple weeks or months. But that's not that long in the greater scheme of things, especially if it's important data. So they're supposed to give you estimated time and date when it will be available. And they often don't like to pin themselves down. So you may have to be persistent and coming back and saying, I really need it by December 1st. Can you please expedite it, or whatever the date is, to really kind of, the more you get in their face and bug them about it, the more likely they are, to actually put it to the front burner, the quicker they're likely to do it. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah. Sometimes they'll do that. They'll say, it's not that formal. I mean, they'll sometimes they're supposed to request an extension. There's all this process where they're not supposed to get an extension for more than 14 days, right? Honestly, a lot of times it's not that formal. I've closely followed this. And a lot of times the person's like, oh yeah, we're people out on sick leave, we're understaffed. We'll get back to you. It's often not that formal is what I'm trying to say. So even though the extension is not supposed to be more than 14 days, in reality, sometimes they kind of push it And I think sometimes they push it because they know there's not really that much you can do. But the best thing you can do is to come back and say, according to the Public Records Act, an extension cannot be more than 14 days. Therefore, I expect to get it by this day, and the more you show that you know the law, that's really the key point. The more that you demonstrate, what the Public Records Act requests, the Public Records Act says, you are holding them to account. You are putting in writing what the expectations are they're supposed to meet for producing the data. And you keep coming back and saying, I still have not heard from you. This is my second follow-up. Please let me know, according to the Public Records Act, why, give me your response. The more you do that, the more they're likely to respond, because they know that they're dealing with somebody that is not going to go away. So it's a powerful law, and you have to signal to them, that, and you're willing to use it to get the information that you want. So this is all true, right? But in practice, sometimes it doesn't always happen in exactly this way, but you just have to be persistent. Next slide. Yeah. So if they really don't provide the information you ask for, this is right. If you've tried, and you have to be really reasonable and say, look, I understand you have 3 staff out at the same time and one person's on maternity. They always have excuses, right? I understand all that, but we're now 2 weeks past the statutory deadline. So at this point, I really need you to comply. If you keep asking them and coming at them with another email, and say, look, you're not complying with the law, there will come a time when you can start getting serious and saying, I feel the information is being improperly withheld. You are not in compliance with the Public Records Act. And if you do not respond by this date, I may have to seek a court order. And that's kind of it's like a threat. You know what I mean? When you get to the point, if they're really not responding, and that might need to happen. You might need to seek a court order, and that's something that, if it really comes to that, we'd have to think about. And I don't know, that's, if you have to seek a court order, potentially the judge could award your costs and attorney's fees if you win. That doesn't happen very often. I want to be honest, it does not happen very often, and that's really more if you've kind of tried everything and you're really at your wit's end. And at that point, we might well reach out, to Assembly Member Addis's office, right? And say, look, we passed this law, but they're just not complying with it. And we don't have to seek a court order. So there's a lot of things we can do if it comes to that. I'm hoping it doesn't, but every once in a while, it does go that far where they simply don't comply. I have never had to seek a court order. I've never had to go that far. But I have had to follow up a number of times sometimes to get the data that I wanted, and cited from the law and said, you are out of compliance with the Public Records Act. I've already had 2 follow-ups. It's been 30 days. The law says you're supposed to provide it by 14 days. I need it, by this date. And then that usually will work. So anyway, are there more slides? I'm actually not.
There are, but I'll take it over from here.
Okay.
But stay, because there's a million questions in the chat that I'm going to need you to answer verbally.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Allison. That was amazing. You are a resident expert. You can go to the next slide. Just a couple more slides left.
Okay.
So we saw this in the chat. People were like, what is it that we might request? So here are some examples of some ideas that DVU has. These are just examples. You may have other ideas as well. Well, we've said it like 4 times already, but I keep seeing things in the chat. You cannot request personal information. So do not submit a PRA request to your regional center to say, my next door neighbor has a developmental disability. I want to know what services they get. Like, you cannot do that. That means nobody can ask for your personal information either. But what can you ask? So lots of regional centers have their own individual policies about how they make determinations on eligibility. So who can and can't be a regional center client. And these are sometimes internal policies that are not public. They also might have certain kinds of decision policies, internal policies on whether a person can get service or not an individual, but what kind of people can get certain kind of services and who can't. So those are definitely some ideas. Many, if not all, regional centers have this group, this secret private group. They call them clinical team, exceptions committees, POS committee. Every regional center calls it something different. But basically, you go to your service coordinator and you say, I would like to get this service. And the service coordinator, in 95% of circumstances, says, I will get back to you. If it is not a small standard ask, like if you're asking for 10 hours a month of respite, pretty sure they could probably just do that at the service coordinator level. But if you're saying something like, here are my needs, I need this special kind of day program because I can't be in a large group all the time, or whatever it is almost 100% of the time brought to the secret committee. So you can ask about what the policies are that they're using in that secret committee. And guess what? You can also ask who sits on that secret committee, because that is not private personnel information. It's like, this committee meets once a week, once every 2 weeks. I want to know who it is that's talking about my services. You can ask that question. You can also ask if any regional centers are subject to what's called a corrective action. So corrective action means that the regional center is not meeting a specific standard that DDS has set for them. There's maybe something happening at that that you have concerns about. You can ask for any corrective actions a regional center is under. You can do the same thing for vendors. You can actually get a lot of information about vendors now that regional centers are under the Public Records Act. So even though the vendors, like we're meaning like a specific organization or company that provides services in the traditional system, I should say. So even though those vendors are not in essence subject to the Public Records Act, any communication that they are having that is not private with the regional center is subject to the Public Records Act. So the communication may be about their program design, or it may be about their contract. And in fact, you can get a copy of the contract of any regional center vendor. You can see that contract. And I suspect there will be cases where we can that's going to be important to an individual to see what's in the program design. And a corrective action of a vendor could honestly mean like somebody died on their watch. Or you could also ask, you can ask this, how many people have had a special incident report, or SIR? Some of you may have heard that term before, but you can say, for ABC company that provides services, I would like to know how many special incident reports they have had in the past 5 years. So you can get data like that to see. Now, you always have to read into data, by the way. For that data point, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is not a good service provider. Sometimes there are service providers who take cases, they take clients who are the hardest to serve. And there may be daily special incident reports with an individual. It doesn't mean that they're getting abused by that person. But if somebody has, for example, an aggressive behavior while they're at a day program, the provider must file a special incident report about that. So you could also ask, how many complaints have there been about the service providers, as long as the names of the individuals are not put in there, called redacted. You could also ask to see all of the board of director and staff conflict of interest forms. So every single person who works at a regional center and every single board member of the regional center must fill out a conflict of interest form. And so what it might say is, you might be a staff member at the regional center and your husband might be work at a service provider agency, and they have to fill out a form to say, I have a conflict with this because of my husband, and these are the ways that we're going to make sure that that conflict doesn't exist. Like, I will never refer any of my client load to my husband's service provider agency. So you could ask to see all of the conflict of interest forms that have been put in at your regional center. You could also ask for things like, I would like to see the composition of the board members and the board committees by race and disability, just to get a sense. That is public information, and that's just some ideas. There are many, many other ideas I know that some people are thinking about. Next slide, please. Okay, I previewed this. You do not need to put in a public information request to get information about your own services or your family member services. We have heard this before, where people are like, I can't get a copy of my IPP, so I'm going to put in a Public Records Act request. No, you should not have to do that. You are entitled to everything that is in your file. Anytime anything is ever written about you, you are entitled to see it. Sometimes we're not given it, but you can ask for it from your service coordinator, and the Public Records Act is not an issue there. But you are definitely not allowed to ask for information about another person's services, their SDP budget, who their staff members are. Like, you're not allowed to ask those kinds of personal questions. You are not also allowed to ask for private communication about a person that is not you or your family member. So while you can ask for private communication when it deals with public information, for example, you could put in a PRA request asking for all emails sent between the board of directors and the executive director as they were developing a specific policy for the regional center. So maybe it was a purchase of service policy, or a policy on conflict of interest, or whatever it is. You can ask for all communication back and forth, emails, and any kind of written record that exists on there. You can ask that, but it cannot be like, I want to see an email back and forth about a personnel matter. Like, that is private information. Like, let's say there's a staff member at your regional center and you want to see their personnel record, you cannot ask for that. Okay? That's not public. All right, next slide. So it's important to remember, don't just start throwing in a bunch of PRA requests. You should not be doing that if they are not legal requests, because what's going to end up happening is you're going to bog down the system with these requests where the regional centers are having to answer these things like, no, that is private. No, that is private. And we want the regional centers to spend their time answering requests that actually will bring more transparency to the system. So we want you to be thoughtful and responsible as you're doing that. And don't make a request just because you can. Like, you be thoughtful, like, what would I need this information for? How would I advocate for a change because I get this data or this information? So next slide, please. I think that might have been the last slide. Right. So you can stop sharing, and I'm now going to throw it back to Elizabeth Gomez to talk a little bit about sort of what you're hearing and what the Latino community is going to be thinking about.
Gracias, Yuri. De todo lo que se ha estado explicando esta noche es muy importante para nosotros, pero las cosas que más resaltan para nosotros es ese POS Committee o comité fantasma que le llamamos, porque las familias experimentan ser mandadas a toda decisión es hecha por un comité que nunca se aparece, que nunca se nos dice los nombres y simple y sencillamente toman decisiones que afectan el resto de la vida con los clientes. Nosotros estamos en una situación donde no solamente tenemos ese problema, tenemos el problema del lenguaje, del idioma, el cual también afecta con las notas o la información que se encuentra en los archivos, que muchas veces no refleja lo que realmente se discutió, lo que se habló o el pedido. Para eso nosotros en este tiempo estamos viendo la habilidad de poder tener más igualdad, más transparencia y la oportunidad que se nos da de poder pedir también datos que nos indiquen a cuántas personas también se les están negando estos mismos servicios que a nosotros por años se nos han negado. Yuri, también quisiera poder tomar la oportunidad de poder relatar algo que es muy importante, que afectó mucho a nuestra comunidad, con AB 1147, en el centro regional o la mesa directiva que apoyó esta proposición fue afectada drásticamente y muchos de los padres que se encontraban sirviendo en esa mesa reportan haber tenido extremas situaciones de retaliación que les está afectando aún hasta este día. Nosotros los encontramos escuchando, diciendo cómo les ha afectado a ellos en su vida. En este tiempo, y en aquellos tiempos, no se podía pedir información, no hay información que te den, no había nada que se pudiera hacer. En este caso, nosotros vemos que para un futuro, con a nuestra comunidad que es afectada por muchísima retaliación, me pregunto cómo nos puede ayudar, Yuri, esta habilidad de ahora poder obtener esta información.
Yeah, that's a great question. And you could, Allison, you can come back on to also answer this. So I know that a lot of people live in fear of retaliation, like they're going to take away services, they're going to do something to hurt us in some kind of way. And those fears are real. And I get that. But remember that when you ask for a Public Records Act request, like that's you have a written record of that. And if anything happens, like your services get removed because you just asked for a PRA request, like that is a very bad thing. And we could easily file a complaint with DDS over that. DDS is watching this. They are supposed to be watching this. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Allison.
Look, they're not supposed to retaliate. I mean, right? But as Judy said, the fear is real. I guess what I would say is, if it's a situation where you have a real concern, you really want to get information, but you're too scared to do it yourself, you can ask someone else to do it. Remember, anyone can file a Public Records Act request, and it's not that onerous. So I don't think we should have a situation where, like, DVU or some of this deluge with people wanting to file requests on their behalf. That wouldn't be helpful and a good use of DVU's time. That being said, if there's a special situation where, you want someone else, to file it for you, you could ask a friend, you could ask someone, they won't necessarily connect to you, because anyone can do it. So just keep that in mind as an option, right? If you're particularly scared about that.
So there's a bunch of questions in the chat, but I want to also give people the opportunity that if you want to verbally ask a question, you can go down to the bottom of your screen and choose the raise hand feature. And I believe that is my partner in crime, Tina Ewing Wilson. If she's available, she can help monitor. Tina, are you available? I'm not sure her camera's off. So I'll also you look at the raise hands as well if Tina is stepped away. I'm going to start. Oh, there you are. Hey,
Here.
thanks. Yay. So if you could be monitoring the hands, I'm going to go through there's a whole bunch of questions in the chat. I'm going to go through a few of them and then we can do some raise hands. There's a whole bunch of people asking about the kinds of things that you could ask for. Well, I think I answered this. Somebody was asking about whether they can receive the vendor's program design without the billing information. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by without the billing information, but you can ask for the program design. That's That's a pretty standard thing. And it's the program design is not supposed to be just for one client. It's supposed to be a general program design of that service provider. So but you should know that how much a regional center is paying a service provider is very, very important to find out and is public information as long as it's not down to the individual level. So you can't like how much are you paying the service provider to work with this individual? No. But you could say, how much was paid to this service provider in the past 5 years? I would like it annually, just so that you know how much money has been provided to them and what kind of services are being, you would have judgments on their services. So there's a question about why the regional center gets to charge for things, which I know is a passion of yours, Allison. Why don't you answer that?
Yeah, I responded in the thread. Look,
right, but so just so that you know, there are people watching us on Facebook Live and they're not seeing the thread.
Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate.
Yeah.
Look, it's in the law. Okay, so one answer is just that they had to get the law passed. Right. And the idea is these are people, generally public servants, right? And these agencies don't have like traditionally a set part of their budget, just for a whole staff, just to deal with Public Records Act requests. And so they actually did get a little money for this, but the concept is that, it's not part of their main job description. And you can imagine a situation where it could be abused, right? Like you can imagine a situation where somebody could just like file 1,000, public record. This actually sometimes be weaponized. I actually do want to say this isn't hypothetical. I mean, I'm sadly with our politics the way they are today, there actually are situations in which people are like weaponizing the Public Records Act request. So for certain like okay, I won't even. It's
give ideas
thing. Okay, I'm not. Never mind. So, but because it can be weaponized sometimes in a way that's really unfair, you could have somebody who's bogged down with like hundreds of requests. So I think the idea is, look, if you're going to file the request, if it's going to cost extra staff time within reason, maybe that's part of their budget, but you don't want to, it's not a ton of money that typically they charge. The things they charge a significant amount of money for, just to make it more concrete, they were doing pretty significant data pulls. I was saying like, the average number, I'm trying to remember, it was like, all the data on 4731, certain complaints filed with the state for like ever in history. And then like columns broken down by regional center averages, it was, I believe someone had to do a bunch of queries of their database. That's fair, So some of the examples that Judy gave, if you want to like, what's the average expenditure, sort of averages for certain groups, that will take them a little bit of time. So I do think it's kind of reasonable, right? Because that is, you don't want them to bear all that burden because some regional centers could get hit really hard. That's the rationale. Something else I did want to, if you don't mind, Judy, just because I have been following sort of the threads. There's some uncertainty. I just want to say that right now. I don't think anybody on this call, myself included, could say for sure exactly like whether, they'll produce something or not. There's a little bit of a gray area sometimes. Like, for example, there's been a lot of back and forth about details around service coordinators. It makes sense they don't want to give up personal cell phones. I get that. But, like how detailed are the org charts or like the number of complaints? That was somebody mentioned something about number of complaints against service coordinators. So probably, my guess is if you ask for that and you mention a specific service coordinator, they would probably say no, that's protected under the human resources. There's like one of those exemptions is for like HR records, human resources records. I don't think they'd want to produce that. But if you said something like, the average number of complaints filed against, service coordinators, they're going to be looking for some exemptions, probably. Honestly, they're going to be looking for a reason to say no, some of them. And so that's another reason, to Judy's point, where you don't want to just go on a fishing expedition and just think of everything you could possibly want, because then it's just the whole thing's going to sort of fall apart. And then they're going to stop being cooperative. And if you don't want to have to take them to court. You know what I mean? It's just some of it is based on goodwill and hopefully some cooperation. So I really underscore Judy's point but you also may not know in advance. You may think that something, is fair, good faith, say, I want this information. They come back and say, well, actually, we can't do it because of this. That happens. That's happened to me. Sometimes I request information and they come back and say, actually, we can't, that doesn't exist, or we can't do it because of this. And then sometimes it's a negotiation. So anyway, I'll stop there, but that's the response to
Yeah.
some of the things in the chat.
So I'm going to add something that you mentioned that I forgot to say. Each regional center has been given money by DDS
Yeah.
to help implement the Public Records Act. It's actually a substantial amount of money, more than I was surprised at how much they got. I mean, they have funding to hire a lawyer to ensure that they're not giving out private information. They're having a clerk doing it. They're, I think, a paralegal. I mean, they got like 3 positions at each regional center just to give to Public Records Act requests. And it's possible that regional centers are going to get very few requests. I mean, maybe there will be a bunch of them at the very beginning and then people will stop asking. So we'll have to see, especially during these times of budget cuts, whether that's going to be necessary for the long term. The other thing you should know is that regional centers have been getting a lot of training on this. ARCA, the Association of Regional Center Agencies, has been training regional center staff on what is allowed to be provided, what is not, what is considered an exemption. And the other thing I'll say is that on January 1st, all 21 regional centers are going to have something on their website. And so you will be able to fill out a form on the website saying, this is the request that I have. It's something that exists on the DDS website currently, and every regional center will have it. So it's going to be very easy. It's like, I want to know what your internal policies are around respite. Okay, you just put it in there, try to be specific so they're not giving you too much. But I wanted to make that point. All right, Tina, we got some hands up.
Yeah, we got 3. Let's start with Carl.
Okay.
Carl,
Am
Hi,
I
Carl.
unmuted?
You are
Yes.
unmuted. I can hear you loud and clear.
Hey, God bless you, Judy. When did we first meet? It has to be like almost
2014, babes.
I remember the event at the hotel near LAX. What a marvelous event. I'm not going to consume a lot of time. I want to make sure that everyone in here, I'm typing it in right now, will visit my blog. I have been an advocate for my deaf children because of their failure to provide services for the deaf community. And eventually we got that. And I've been an advocate for other events and matters, and they have retaliated gravely against me. They became my son, Cavan's conservator. And it has been devastating for my son and devastating for our family. And I don't know what to do, but I just so deeply appreciate the opportunity that I can bring this to the attention of 220 concerned people. So God bless all of you. Thank you. Please visit my blog. And Judy, move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. I visit Carl's blog on a regular basis. Very interesting information there. Thank you, Carl, for everything. Let's take one more hand up.
Justin Hope.
Never hear me?
Yes.
I hear you.
Well, I think I've been assumed with you guys for a long time with COVID to that 2020 when it all shut down. I did some training with you guys, and I did doing some training. I could see, and I just let you know, I just finished my cohort accuracy, so I can be goodly or highly the meaning, so I can open my accuracy clip. Yes, I do let you know I am North Bay, Napa County, and we have office North Bay. Come see me, and then at other agency called Cal Mentor Home, and this is soon. He will come here, come in twice a day to see me how I'm doing. Yes, I am. I can see. I am the I could see, and I learn all of that. So I go to the measure. I can see Zoom with her and Joe Ballas, in I could see North Bay office in Bill. So I did a lot with you guys, and thank you for letting me come on.
Absolutely. Good to see you, Justin. That's great. All right, let me go back to some of the questions that have been in the chat. Somebody was just asking, since this is an SDP Connect, if you can ask about the FMSs. Let's brainstorm. What might we want to put in a PRA? So you're not submitting the PRA to the FMS. You're submitting the PRA to the regional center. And like what kind of information would people want to get about an FMS? I'm not sure. I mean, I think you can ask maybe if they have maybe if they have you can certainly see the contract that they have. Like you can't necessarily see internal personnel issues, but you can definitely see whatever information that the service provider provides to the regional center is subject to the PRA. You can't ask for their internal books. That's not something they provided. But you can definitely ask about anything that any communication they've had about their contract with the regional centers as well.
Yeah, the missed vendor payments or delays, unfortunately, I doubt there's going to be a paper trail on that with my FMS. We've had plenty of missed payments and delays, and I doubt that our regional center would have any data. You can try. I mean, you can try. But again, as some of this, it's like you don't know what you don't know, right? Like you don't know. Maybe they do. Maybe they do have information on that. I doubt it. So again, you don't want to overwhelm them, but it's not a bad idea, especially early on, to just get more information about what information they do and don't have. I can think of things to ask about FMSs, like what are the list of all the FMSs that their clients use for starters? Like, we might, that some of that might be on the website actually, but if it's not, or maybe even the number of clients that use different, FMSs, that they should have that maybe, just sort of basic things. So I think, I think it probably does make sense and would be doable to get information on some FMSs personally.
Yeah, great. This is a great question from Fernando before he got on the plane. So this is for you, Allison. Can you ask for a list of who has accessed your child's file? That's only if there's a list to be gotten, like.
Yeah. I mean, if I saw that, like, I don't see a downside in asking. I think, but I would probably phrase it in a way. Some of this is like, I feel like you have to be really, they're going to say no. I mean, they're going to say it doesn't exist. My assumption would be they're just going to say, no, we don't track that. But actually some software programs do actually track who is HR, who accesses different parts of the program. And they might have such a software system. So I would I'm just being sort of a little bit, not devious exactly, but a little strategic about it. I would probably, ask, I don't know if it's public. I don't know. I'd have to think of it. That's a tough one. I think they're going to say they don't track it. And so I'm trying to think if there's any more clever way to get around it, because I'd want to know, for starters, does their software system actually track who accesses it? Because some do and some don't. And
most don't. Most of them don't.
Some of the new, theirs tend to be older, but it does vary by regional center. So the likelihood is it'll take 2 seconds. You'll ask for it. They'll say no responsive records exist, and then you'll move on. That's not the end of the world, but I think that's what the answer I'd be surprised if you didn't get that answer. No information.
So folks should know that the new IT system that someday, and I'll be very old when it actually goes into effect, the new IT system for the whole that DDS is creating for all of the regional centers will be as compliant as hospitals' privacy issues, where if you're checked into a hospital, only certain healthcare providers can access your medical records, and there is a time and date stamp by the person, by their they have to put in a password so they know who went in and looked at it. That I can tell you at Fernando and my regional center, that does not exist. And we know for a fact that our kids' files have been explored by people who had no right to look at them to see our son's IPP. And I have found that out from other people. And they still haven't fixed that. But it will be fixed someday when I'm super old and have to have, and I forgot, and I've stopped coloring my hair to try to even pretend not to be gray. Okay, let's take the next hand up.
Stephanie.
Hey, Judy and Tina.
Hi, Stephanie.
I was just wondering, as a general question, can we ask them how much to pay employees and vendors when you're in a new budget year? Instead of individual person, just as a general question?
Yeah. So that's not something you would need to ask for a Public Records Act request for, because in the self-determination program, you can determine what the salaries are of the people that you hire. Obviously, you have to stay within your budget amount, but you can determine that. And so the regional center wouldn't be dictating that anyway. So I'm not sure you'd need to ask that question, Stephanie. However, if you're interested in salaries of staff, you can ask for the salaries of all the staff and the categories of staff, not an individual at the regional center, but you can absolutely ask for the base or the average salary of service coordinators. You should certainly ask what the executive director makes, which, by the way, is already a matter of public record and is required to be on every regional center's website. But as Allison can tell you, it does not exist on every regional center's website, even though they're required to do that. And it also actually appears in the regional center's tax returns, but they're not always putting their most recent tax returns on their website either. So some of the top executives and how much they pay is already a matter of public information, but you could ask not how much does this particular service coordinator make, but you could ask what are the levels? What is the starting salary of a service coordinator, and what are the basic levels, and what is the highest salary that they can reach? These are definitely things you can ask. Okay, back to the yeah, somebody was asking if we can see the complaint history of the service coordinators and their managers. It just all depends on whether that's in their private personnel file. So if it's in their personnel file, it's probably no.
Yeah, it's
wouldn't you agree, Allison?
I think they're going to say no, but I think the question is if you can frame it in a way that maybe sometimes you try to think of workarounds.
Yeah.
The first answer is going to be no, but then the question is if you can reframe it in a different way. As long as it's not identifiable to an individual, you might be able to get that information. Like what are the total number of complaints against service coordinators, in a year? And what are the total number of service coordinators? That's not going to give you an individual level, but it might give you, although I'm not even sure exactly complaints. I'm not sure what you'd have to be more specific in terms of what do you mean by complaint exactly? Is there a formal complaint process? Complaints can be many different things, is my point. But if you specify exactly what complaints you're talking about, you're better off just sort of aggregating, not asking about one individual, like Judy was saying, but asking the total number per month or by month, or the total number per year, and then getting an average. That's less of an issue and that can sometimes tell you a lot, actually. Sometimes.
So Dora was asking about whether facilities or care homes or group homes are under this law. So it's not so much that the facility is under the PRA, but their interactions with the regional center, as long as it's not private information, you are able to see those. So if there's a care home that has a contract with your regional center, you can see the contract, you can see their program design. And you might even be able to ask for the number or the average complaints. I mean, I don't know, because they would have to redact any kind of information. So let's say you're a person, you're an adult, and you're thinking of moving into a group home, and you want to know whether people have died there or people have been abused there, like how would you get at that information, Allison?
Actually, there's other ways to get that that's better than this. If it's a particular home, actually the Department of Social Services has a data set that they maintain, which has data on, I think it has complaint data, but it has like the outcome of inspections and stuff. It's not perfect. And unfortunately, it's not very user friendly, but that is public record. It is public record. There's some things that are not public record. Like for example, if it's a if it's children's group home, they won't give a street address. They won't give a location just because like it's a security concern, but they're probably just going to point you to that website rather than, because that's already, it's Department of Social Services publishes that. I guess I can try to find I could try to Google it now, but it's already, there's like a portal where you can download on every single licensed community care facility in California. I wouldn't go to the regional center for that. I would get it off of the DSS portal.
Great. Nina, you have your hand up, I just saw.
Nina, you're still muted.
Oh, there we go.
I was trying to get the thing, click on the right thing. Yeah, I was actually just going to say basically what Allison just said, but because I've been through this on individual basis, but community care licensing, regional center wouldn't be the treasure trove of these. Community care licensing and whatever the larger agencies would have that kind of stuff. And I do think and that idea of aggregating or talking about a class of things is always better, I think. But I have had, when I've been directed to like, go check out XYZ home, I've just said, I want to see what complaints. And, you can just get people to give you that. But I would definitely go to community care licensing agencies instead of the regional center for them. That is their job, to keep that data.
Yeah. I'll try to find the link if I can right now, just to.
Okay, great. So I think we're almost out of time. So I'll just ask another. So Jennifer just has a really quick question that's not related to the PRA, but I just want to clarify this. Is asking, if I file an appeal entering into the SDP, can the regional center reduce my budget? They only approved expenditure report from last 12 months. Okay, so there's so many things that are wrong here. First of all, no one is allowed to reduce your budget if you file an appeal. That is retaliation. So no on that. And then if they're only approving your expenditure report from the last 12 months, that is breaking the law. The law is your last 12 months are, it's the last 12 months of authorized services, not how much you actually spent. So it's actually, so Jennifer hasn't entered in yet. So the budget should be based on the last 12 months of services that were authorized in the IPP. You did not have to actually use any of those services. All right, so it is 6 o'clock and I'm actually up in Sacramento where I'm about to go see the Capitol Christmas tree get lit. And it's a bunch of people with developmental disabilities who are lighting the tree, and there's all 21 regional centers have little mini trees all around the big tree. I've never been here before for this particular event, but it is kind of fun. And I'm going to put on different earrings and wear red and green. So I'm the Jewish person who will celebrate Christmas today. But speaking of the holidays, happy holidays to everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful holiday season. Please take some time to be with whomever you want to be with. Family of choice. I'm with my family of choice, generally not with my actual family. So, and a lot of the people in these little boxes here are my family of choice. So we really appreciate you all. We'll be back next month with a new year of SDP Connects. We want to thank also our wonderful, wonderful interpreters who've been with us day in, day out. We so appreciate you all and love y'all. Have a great holiday. Happy New Year.